Have you ever seen anyone with a face that's shining? It's a bit of an odd question. The context was our community prayer time at L'Arche this week. We read a scripture, then we have what we call talk about time to share and reflect on our experiences, people with and without disabilities together. So this week, we read this gospel story about Jesus and his friends at the top of a mountain when his clothes become bright white and his face is shining. When I asked, "Have you ever seen anyone with a face that's shining?" Marianne grinned, and then she stood up and pointed to her own face. And she was beaming, and she extended her arms out to the group, and then she just sat back down. It was a classic Marianne moment. She has a smile that lights up any room, an enthusiasm, a confidence that can get anyone on board with just about anything. She dresses in bright colors and often paints her nails to match her outfit. She's a dancer, rock and roll, belly dancing, liturgical dance, you name it. She works at a local preschool, and the kids love her. She has Down syndrome. Marianne is warm and intuitive. She'll often greet you with a compliment. "Hey, I like your top." She's there with a box of tissues when you're sad, and she's ready to celebrate your big moments with you. When I was ordained priest, she was waiting for me at the back of the church, and as soon as the service had ended, she wrapped me in a big hug and said, "Hey, you did it! You're a priest now." And then, "Good luck, you'll need it." She has a particular gift for noticing people who might otherwise be overlooked. And when she beams her wonderful energy in their direction, she just draws them right in. Some years ago, she and I took part together in an international event for L'Arche with about 400 delegates from all around the world, gathered on a college campus in Atlanta, Georgia. Watching Marianne work that crowd was like handing a paintbrush to Van Gogh and stepping back. She walked from place to place, engrossed in animated conversation with people from all over the world, Honduras, Japan, Ukraine. But the person she was drawn to the most was Randa. Randa was from Syria. Marianne spent much of the week arm in arm with Randa. Now, Randa was the sort of person that you could lose in a crowd. She was short and slim. She wore glasses and walked with a lopsided gait. I don't remember hearing her speak at all. Now, we all knew that war had broken out in Syria, and it was impossible to imagine on that perfect green little college campus, amongst all that celebration, that some of our members would soon return to life in a war zone. And while the rest of us may have been thinking about this, it was Marianne who did something. Every time the music picked up, Marianne would come up front to dance, and she would pull Randa up onto the stage with her and put her right at the center of the gathering. And in all the photos, you see the two of them raising their hands in the air as they danced, their faces shining with joy. Author David Brooks might say that Marianne is an illuminator. In his book, How to Know a Person, Brooks explores the art of seeing others deeply and being deeply seen. In it, he asks questions like, how do we help someone flourish by reflecting their gifts and beauty back to them? In a world so often marked by division and discord, how can we learn and practice the small things that promote mutual understanding and flourishing? Brooks says that in every crowd, there are diminishers and illuminators. Diminishers make people feel small and unseen, consciously or not, through intention or omission. They ignore, reduce, or minimize. Illuminators, on the other hand, are interested, curious, and concerned. They shine the brightness of their care on people and make them feel bigger, deeper, respected, lit up. Being an illuminator lies in the way we show up for people with attention, warmth, openness, and generosity. Truth is, we're probably not all one or the other. On any given day, we may have moments of each. And ultimately, says Brooks, being an illuminator is more than a skill set to be mastered. It's a way of life. Jesus is an illuminator. The Gospels tell us over and over how he would turn the light of his attention toward the person right in front of him, healing, encouraging, inviting. Nowhere is that clearer than in today's gospel reading, in that extraordinary mountaintop moment when Jesus was transfigured, his face shining like the sun. He's joined by Moses and Elijah, a flash of light, a glimpse of greatness, a cloud, a voice, and it's over. We might wonder, what did this one brief, shining moment mean in Jesus' entire friendship with Peter, James, and John, his inner circle? We might imagine that when Jesus had first approached them by the Sea of Galilee and turned his loving kindness toward them, that he saw something in them that they'd never before seen for themselves. And drawn in by this possibility and promise, they left their nets and followed him into a new way of life. Over and over, they would watch Jesus shine his radiance on people who were sick and suffering, entering fully into the moment to be entirely present with them. And when people tried to worship Jesus, he simply pointed to God, to the one who sent him. And when they tried to make him king, he slipped away. But when the disciples wake up on that mountaintop to that dazzling moment with Jesus, the first thing they want to do is figure out how to make the moment last. Peter wants to build 3 shrines so they can stay there forever and worship. Relatable. These days, when we experience something extraordinary, the first thing we do is reach for our phones to capture the moment. Or we might want to just grab onto that special thing and hold it so we can keep going back to it. Or maybe we want to figure out how to mass produce it, to sell it and make a fortune off it. We want to capture, control, commodify. When the disciples come down from the mountain, they don't exactly sound like illuminators. If we read on in chapter 9 of Luke, they begin to argue about which of them is the greatest. Jesus takes a child in his arms and says, "Whoever is least among you is the greatest." And then, as Jesus set his face toward Jerusalem, one village refused to welcome him. And when James and John saw this, they said, "Lord, do you want us to command fire to come down from heaven and consume them?" And Jesus just shakes his head. It sounds like the disciples were having a hard time learning that when we are gifted with a moment of brightness, it's not ours to bask in the spotlight, but rather a chance to reflect God's love and goodness back to others. It would take Peter, James, and John a long time to grasp that discipleship is more than a handful of peak moments or a skill set to be mastered. It's a way of life. one in which the more we come to know Jesus, the more we come to know others, and vice versa. I think this is how we grow into Jesus' example as an illuminator. What might that look like for us? Well, it might be a little easier than we think. I remember a time that Marianne and I offered the sermon together at a church on a Sunday morning. We got up and shared some photos and stories connected to the gospel. When we finished, everybody clapped, and we went and sat back down in the front pew. And the minister moved to the center to carry on with the rest of the service. But then Marianne left her seat and came back up front to stand near him. And he paused for a moment, not quite sure where this was going. Now, I recall that he'd recently been widowed. In fact, it may have been his first Sunday back at church. But Marianne wouldn't have known that. But she stood there quietly with her hand on her hip, just looking at him, and she tilted her head. It was just quiet for a moment, and she said, "Well, you're a good person." And then she went and sat back down. A bunch of emotions flashed across his face all at once, but mostly he seemed stunned by the kindness of it. I want to close with a poem by Danusha Lamaris. It's called Small Kindnesses. Small Kindnesses. It goes like this. I've been thinking about the way when you walk down a crowded aisle, people pull in their legs to let you by. Or how strangers still say, "Bless you," when someone sneezes, a leftover from the bubonic plague. Don't die, we're saying. And sometimes when you spill lemons from your grocery bag, someone else will help you pick them up. Mostly, we don't want to harm each other. We want to be handed our cup of coffee hot, to say thank you to the person handing it, to smile at them and for them to smile back, for the waitress to call us honey when she sets down the bowl of clam chowder, and for the driver in the red pickup truck to let us pass. We have so little of each other now, so far from tribe and fire, only these brief moments of exchange. What if they are the true dwelling of the holy? These fleeting temples we make together when we say, "Here, have my seat. Go ahead, you first. I like your hat."